welcome our distinguished panel to consider the President's budget request for the National Guard and Reserve components for fiscal year 2020. I think I need to turn that on. Today, the committee will hear from General Joseph Lengyel, Chief of the National Guard Bureau, Lieutenant General Charles Luckey, Chief of the Army Reserve, Lieutenant General Richard Scobee, Chief of the Air Force Reserve, Vice Admiral Luke McCollum, Chief of the Navy Reserve, and Major General Bradley James, Commander of Marine Corps Forces Reserve. I thank all of you for your appearance here today. I think it's imperative that our nation's Guard and Reserve components be sufficiently manned, trained, and equipped to continue to maintain and to defend our national security interests. Our nation's Guard and Reserve components are a vital part of the nation's total military force. They provide support during homeland emergencies, participate in important joint training exercises, execute missions with our partners, and are currently deployed around the globe in support of combat operations. The men and women that make up our reserve components also serve our nation by remaining ready to put their lives on hold. Whether they're called to mobilize, voluntarily deploy, or transition to full-time support, they represent the very best of us. And as we wrestle with responses to recent national disasters and deployments to our southwest border, it's also important to highlight the unique flexibility offered by the National Guard. Their ability to operate through dual status commanders provides an invaluable link between state and federal authorities. As we evaluate the request for resources for fiscal year 2020, I think we have to look forward to updates on disaster response and border efforts. But we would also like to focus on how this budget reflects the new National Defense Strategy, and in particular, how it proposes to modernize our forces to compete and win against peer competitors. We all look forward to your testimony here today. Your written testimony, all of it will be made part of the record without objection in its entirety. Senator Durbin, I understand, will be joining us in just a few minutes, and his remarks will be made part of the record. General Lengyel, we'll start with you.
Chairman Selby, sir, thank you. Thank the Vice Chairman Durbin and distinguished members of the subcommittee. It is a pleasure for all of us to be here today and would submit our remarks for the record at this time. The National Guard consists of nearly 450,000 citizen soldiers and airmen. They represent the finest National Guard force in our history, and I'm honored to represent them along with their families, their communities, and their employers who support them. The National Defense Strategy outlines the priorities for our military to deter war and protect the security of our nation. My focus remains our three primary missions: the warfight, defending and securing the homeland, and building enduring partnerships. Each one of these missions directly support the National Defense Strategy. In the warfight, on any given day, approximately 30,000 men and women of the National Guard are mobilized in support of every combatant command around the globe. Our soldiers and airmen work with allies and partners to compete against adversaries below the threshold of armed conflict, to expand our nation's competitive space, and to ensure we maintain our advantage. We are poised in regions where our men and women are postured to delay, deter, and deny adversarial aggression. The National Guard is prepared to surge and expand its support in times of war, and we are always there and always ready here in the homeland. As the space domain increasingly becomes a warfighting domain, our Army and Air National Guard space units are vital to the parent services. As with our units in the Army and Air National Guard, it is imperative our space units remain aligned with their parent services, including any potential future Space Force. In the homeland, the National Guard has, on average, 10,000 soldiers and airmen conducting homeland operations every day. Your Air National Guard fighter wings are protecting our nation's skies in 15 alert sites around the country, including the skies over the Capitol here today. Our cyber units continue to protect our networks from malicious cyber attacks. 27 of our state's National Guard cyber units were on duty and provided support during the most recent elections to ensure their integrity. The National Guard is also critical to our nation's ballistic missile defense as proliferation of missile technology continues to expand. On top of all of this, the National Guard is ready to respond to emergencies such as hurricanes, wildfires, flooding, as well as assist law enforcement during times of civil unrest. Missions that the National Guard performs with little or no notice. Last year, the National Guard was called up 195 times to respond to homeland emergencies. Our presence in communities around the nation uniquely posture us to respond when our communities need us. The National Guard's success in the warfight and homeland operations is a direct result of the enduring partnership we build with the international, federal, state, and local partners. The National Guard, through the State Partnership Program, now partners with 83 nations. This low-cost, high-return program builds enduring partnerships based on mutual trust and generates security cooperation around the world. To date, the National Guard has co-deployed 80 times with partner nations to Iraq, Afghanistan, and other places around the globe. On the federal, state, and local levels, our deep partnerships with the National Guard's unique authorities ensure a speedy response and unity of effort during times of domestic crisis. To ensure the readiness of the National Guard to be deployable, sustainable, and interoperable with our active components, we require such things as appropriate levels of full-time support and replacing and upgrading old, worn-out facilities. We require parity in equipping our force through concurrent and balanced modernization and recapitalization of our force, along with our active components. Mr. Chairman, I offer my sincere thanks to this committee for its long history of support to the National Guard. During my time as Chief, the Guard has seen increases in critical modernization and recapitalization efforts, which provide for increased Guard readiness and lethality. Mr. Chairman, I thank this committee for the continual support of National Guard and Reserve Equipment Account. For decades, this account has enabled the National Guard to field a ready force that both defends the nation and responds to emergency in every community, district, territory, and the state across the country. To all members of this committee, I thank you for the supporting your men and women of the National Guard, their families, and I am honored to be here today representing them, and I look forward to your questions.
General Luckey.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Durbin, distinguished members of this committee, I appreciate again the opportunity to represent before you this morning the 200,000 soldiers, civilian employees of America's Army Reserve. Thank you for the opportunity to be here and for your continued support as we build and support our soldiers, families, and employers and developing the readiness that the nation requires. In preparing to meet the challenges of new evolving threats around the world, your Army Reserve continues to train, organize, and posture itself to identify early deploying formations, aggregate additional capabilities, and move quickly to accomplish post-mobilization training tasks in order to meet the warfighter's time-sensitive requirements. This construct, Ready Force X, remains the way in which we focus energy, optimize our processes, and prioritize our resources to deliver capabilities at the speed of relevance for a major war. Early deploying RFX formations and capabilities need to be able to move quickly, in some cases in days or weeks, in order to support the joint force in any significant conflict or demonstration of national resolve. We do not call this fight tonight readiness, we call it fight fast capability. Over the past year, we've expanded and refined this construct, and we are more ready than ever. While we fully acknowledge that our first responsibility is to bring our unique capabilities as a part of the total Army to winning the nation's wars, we also embrace our opportunity and mandate to respond on no notice to problems and challenges in the homeland. With soldiers, facilities, and capabilities in thousands of communities across the nation, America's Army Reserve is well postured to respond quickly when disaster strikes and our fellow Americans are in time of greatest need. Our key responsive capabilities include search and rescue units, aviation assets, route clearance engineers, medical units, water and fuel distribution and treatment operations, purification, and communication support. America's Army Reserve provided assistance during Hurricanes Harvey, Irma, Maria, and Florence, and a variety of other disasters. We were at it again last month in the state of Nebraska. For the past 2 years, America's Army Reserve has been on the path to seize digital key terrain. This journey presses on as the Army Reserve Innovation Command, headquartered in Houston, Texas, and now in direct support of Army Futures Command in Austin, assesses and develops emerging outposts and technological hubs across the country. The command serves as a link for operational innovation and the development of concepts and capabilities to enhance the readiness of the future force by capitalizing on the extensive civilian acquired or retained skills and knowledge and experience that reside in America's Army Reserve. We're uniquely positioned to support the Army and staying on pace with rapidly emerging trends or opportunities in the private sector, while also providing a potential pool of on-demand talent for Army Futures Command. As it pertains to cyberspace operations, we remain steadily on glide path to establish the 10 cyber protection teams in key locations around the country, such as San Antonio, Boston, Pittsburgh, and the Bay Area in California. Army Reserve cyber soldiers bring unique skills and experience to the force from their civilian occupations, drawn from over 40 corporate, financial, and academic institutions, and they provide direct support to Army Cyber Command and other governmental agencies. Additionally, the Army Reserve recently entered a partnership with the Army Cyber Institute at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, and we will work together in program research. We remain grateful to Congress for passing of the fiscal year 19 Defense Appropriations Bill and ensuring consistent and predictable funding, which will build Army Reserve readiness and support modernization. Finally, we've been able to leverage the congressionally provided National Guard and Reserve Equipment Appropriations, NAGREA, to purchase key systems and tactical vehicles, including the Joint Light Tactical Vehicle, weapons firing simulators, wet gap crossing equipment, and to integrate dual-purpose capabilities that can be brought quickly to bear, not only in wartime, but also to support our fellow citizens in the aftermath of a homeland disaster. As I've testified previously, there's an inherent challenge in a part-time force. This team needs to be ready enough to be relevant, but not so ready that our soldiers can't keep good, meaningful civilian jobs and healthy, sustaining family lives. This nimble and efficient part-time force would not be possible without the support of civilian employers around the globe. They are our essential partners in national security, sharing the best talent in the world with us. As they continue that commitment and sacrifice which allows our soldiers to serve the nation while maintaining rewarding employment, we continue to appreciate your support and encouraging them to do so. We have a deep appreciation for the sharing, the partnership that we are constantly maintaining with our employers across the nation and around the world. As with the employers, nothing would be possible for an all-volunteer force without our families. We continue to focus on making sure we support them, and we make sure that they know how much their support is required to be able to sustain this force. We could not do it without them. Due to Congress's continued support, America's Army Reserve will meet the challenges of the time. Most importantly, we'll remain steady in the saddle and as we build the most capable, combat-ready, and lethal Federal Reserve force in the history of the nation. I thank you for your support. I thank you for your time, and I appreciate and look forward to your questions.
Lieutenant General Scobee.
Chairman Shelby, Vice Chairman Durbin, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to report on the readiness of America's Air Force Reserve. I'm joined today by Chief Master Sergeant Tim White, Command Chief for the Air Force Reserve Command. As a critical component of the total force, the Air Force Reserve provides cost-effective, strategic depth, rapid surge capability, and operational support to the joint force. Our 70,000 citizen airmen are both interchangeable and integrated with their active component counterparts. We fly as one, we train as one, and we fight as one. The Air Force Reserve's current objective is to prepare to operate in tomorrow's battle space while providing excellent support to our airmen and their families. To ensure alignment with the National Defense Strategy, we are focused on prioritizing our strategic depth and accelerating our readiness. We're also going to develop resilient leaders who can generate combat power, and we're going to reform our organization to optimize our warfighting capabilities and take care of our airmen. The on-time allocation of the fiscal year 2019 budget greatly bolstered Air Force Reserve readiness, and we know you're working hard to ensure the timely allocation of the fiscal year 2020 budget. We thank you for your continual support and your diligent effort to ensure we receive the predictable funding we require to defend this great nation. The Air Force Reserve has improved our overall readiness during the past year. We are better prepared at the unit level, and our individual readiness has increased. Our nuclear deterrence forces are mission ready, and we've expanded our mission capabilities by activating our first cyber wing and our first intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance wing. Additionally, we are also aligning our space units to meet future space mission force requirements, whatever they may be. We've improved our lethality by modernizing our weapons systems with the National Guard Reserve Equipment Appropriations. We thank you for those funds, which we also use to purchase much-needed support equipment. We remain focused on our personnel programs and reaching our end strength. We're targeting our full-time manpower shortages with a variety of initiatives, which include converting approximately 1,200 full-time authorizations from Air Reserve technicians to active Guard Reserve positions. The Air Force Reserve has built our success on the hard work of our airmen. Therefore, it's imperative that we ensure our reserve citizen airmen and their families have the support, resources, and care they need. This subcommittee can improve the quality of life for our airmen by supporting legislation to authorize our dual-status Air Reserve technicians to receive medical coverage under the TRICARE Reserve Select Health Care Plan. This initiative would improve health care across our Air Force Reserve for our technicians and their families, and it would significantly increase the retention of our Air Reserve technicians, our most challenging duty status. The Air Force Reserve will continue to increase readiness as we posture our force to meet future operational requirements. I thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today and for your unwavering support as we ensure the Air Force Reserve remains prepared to defend this great nation. I look forward to answering your questions.
Vice Admiral McCollum.
Good morning, Chairman Shelby and Ranking Member Durbin and the distinguished members of the subcommittee. It is my distinct honor to report on the state of America's Navy Reserve, which is a highly skilled and integral part of the Navy's enduring and worldwide fighting force. I come here today representing the 59,000-strong Navy Reserve, a highly skilled addition to the Navy's total force, serving worldwide in not only operationally capable roles, but fulfilling requirements in all geographic combatant commands. They're strategically designed for full mobilization and in support of contingency operations at any time. In balancing these two directives, we continue to strive to maintain a steadfast focus on building war-fighting readiness in support of the requirements outlined in the National Defense Strategy. Every day, I am reminded of and grateful for the sacrifices that our men and women make while they're serving. This morning, we have over 3,045 reserve sailors who have left their families and their employers to serve in some of the most austere locations around the globe. Without their unwavering support of these families, these reserve sailors would not be the force multipliers they are today. I am lucky enough this morning to be joined by one of those loving family members today, as my wife Leanna is here to help me represent the families of our sailors. I believe I speak for all my colleagues here as I offer for my most sincere thanks to this committee for your support. Focused on the objectives of the National Defense Strategy and warfighting readiness, we are building a more lethal Navy Reserve. PB-20 is the mechanism that allows us to continue to focus on strategic depth toward this end. The Navy Reserve utilizes two key enablers, discretionary RPN and flexible NGRIA funding, to generate capability and operability with the total force. Your continued support to ensure these accounts remain robust, consistent, and predictable is critical to our success. The capabilities of the Navy Reserve are focused on bringing agile combat forces to the fight where and when our nation needs, with an investment strategy focused on a balance of readiness, wholeness, and investment initiatives. Accordingly, the recapitalization of aging Navy Reserve hardware is critical to ensuring the highest levels of readiness and interoperability with the active component. PB-20 is prioritized accordingly. Your support of the C-130 Tango avionics upgrade investment through PB-20 is very much appreciated. It also brings the Navy's Maritime Patrol P-8 inventory up to 117, and should additional resources become available, the Navy included P-8s on the unfunded priority list to support the recapitalization of the Navy Reserve's force toward a validated wartime requirement of the P-8s of 138. This also allows these Navy Reserve squadrons in Whidbey Island and Jacksonville to continue to operate beyond 2023. Similar to aviation, recapitalization of expeditionary force assets within the Navy Reserve is equally important, and your support of the 40-foot patrol boats and the Joint Reserve Intelligence Centers, including cyber capability, and these upgrades in PB-20 is very much appreciated. In closing, I could not be prouder to serve as the leader of the Navy Reserve Force. Every time I visit our sailors around the world and the 123 locations of our reserve centers across the U.S., whether it's an aviation squadron deployed or an individual sailor in Afghanistan, I can tell you I come away inspired. with their professionalism, the sincere dedicated to mission, their pride in their civilian skills that they bring to the fight as well. And it brings the total warfighting lethality to the total force. On behalf of the Navy and Navy Reserve, I thank you for your support and look forward to your questions.
General James.
Chairman Shelby, Ranking Member Durbin, and the distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. Testify on behalf of the Commandant of the Marine Corps about your Marine Corps Reserve, consisting of 38,500 fully engaged and 61,000 in the inactive reserve. I am honored to be here with my fellow Reserve Component Service Chiefs. Also with me today is my 4th Sergeant Major, Scott Grade, and the 4th Command Master Chief, Ryan Strack. The mission of the Marine Corps Reserve is to stand ready to augment, reinforce, and sustain the active component. Along with the active component, we have reserve forces forward deployed, supporting combatant command requirements. Over the past year, more than 2,100 Reserve Marines were mobilized, supporting 35 operational requirements in each of the 6 geographic combatant commands. Additionally, 754 Marines volunteered as individual augments, which filled 63% of the service's requirements. I am pleased to inform you that the morale of your Marine Corps Reserve remains high. It is evident by the reserve component end strength maintaining 99% of the total requirement. I am consistently impressed by the professionalism, competence, dedication to duty, and motivation of our Reserve Marines. Like their active duty sisters and brothers, they serve selflessly to protect our great nation. The way they balance family responsibilities, civilian lives, jobs, school, and careers is nothing short of extraordinary. At any given time, Marine Forces Reserve stands ready to provide a brigade-sized element of Reserve Marines and sailors, fully trained for combat operations, while the remainder of our force is poised to augment and reinforce given appropriate amounts of pre-deployment training based upon their wartime mission assignments. I would like to leave this distinguished body with 2 thoughts on how continued support from Congress can result in a more ready and lethal Marine Reserve force. Number 1, I want to extend my gratitude for your continued support of the National Guard and Reserve Equipment Appropriation. I would appreciate a greater spending flexibility within this appropriation in order to procure critical shortfall items and modernize equipment and systems. Number 2, I would like to thank you for this year's appropriations. On average, the Marine Corps Reserves only have 38 training days a year, which places an increased importance on adequate and timely appropriation. With your continued support, I can ensure the Reserve's predictable and uninterrupted training schedules to maximize personnel, material, and training readiness. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. At the start of the current fiscal year, 2,125 National Guardsmen were deployed to our nation's southwest border. Recent projections anticipate 1,807 will remain for the rest of the fiscal year. General Lengyel, can you give the subcommittee an update here today on the current deployment?
Yes, Chairman. We have been deployed. The National Guard has been deployed on the border since a year ago, since April 6th. As of this morning, we have 2,079 National Guard soldiers and airmen that are deployed still in all 4 border states, predominantly in Texas and Arizona that have the preponderance of those forces. They are doing this in a volunteer status under the command and control of the governors in their states. So they're guardsmen on the border. It's anticipated that the Department of Defense assigned to the National Guard the responsibility to supply up to a total of 4,000 was what we were authorized to put on the southwest border and fund using our training dollars to fund them while they are there. It's anticipated that the current level of 2,000, where they are about right now, should be sustained for about the rest of the year.
Is that enough?
It is, well, if you're down there for the Department of Homeland Security, they would like more, actually. But I would tell you that they are very valued to the Customs and Border Protection and to DHS in performing their border security missions.
General, deployments for the Guard forces to the southwest border exist as unfunded requirements in our fiscal cycle, because those deployments follow requests for assistance, RFA, initiated by the Department of Homeland Security, as you know. The current RFA, request for assistance, extends through September, and some estimates predict a $247 million shortage of funding for pay and operation, $250 million. Could you describe how you plan to mitigate the current shortfall and what planning has gone into the deployments to the border during the 2020? Can you tell us how the department might better account for costs through normal budget process?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, and your numbers are accurate. I mean, it is projected that approximately $247 million is what we project the total cost of the National Guard deployment to the southwest border will, in fact, be. And I would tell you that if through the course of the year there is an expectation by the National Guard that funds will be reprogrammed from some other source within the department to cover those training costs, we're using our training dollars to do this. As a round number, you know, it costs the National Guard about $100 million to do one drill weekend for the Army National Guard. So at the end of the year, we will need a reprogramming of about $193 million to not impact the normal training schedules that the National Guard is expected to do to be a ready part of the Army and part of the Air Force.
Okay. General Luckey, I'll direct this question to you. In order to identify funds for the modernization priorities managed by the Army Futures Command, the Army recently realigned $33 billion through the truncation or elimination of 186 programs, many of which provide logistical capabilities. What's your level of integration with the Army Futures Command at this point, and what was your involvement in the process that produced the reductions?
Chairman, let me take the second question first, if I may.
Okay.
My involvement was persistent and constant, and candidly, I was a full partner and many had many opportunities to discuss with senior leadership all aspects of that process that you just alluded to. As it pertains specifically to our relationship with the Army from a logistics perspective, as you well know, Chairman, we're fully integrated with the Army as an enabling capability from the very first days of any sort of mobilization for major contingency operations. I'll tell you that inside the Army Reserve, I won't say we have led this effort, but we have anticipated now for some time that this is going to require a prioritization of where do we modernize first, what formations need to be trained to a slightly higher state of readiness so they're able to execute their task on time, as I alluded to in my opening statement. And I will tell you that as part of our RFX, our Ready Force X construct, we have already designated a significant portion of our force to be able to deploy, as I said earlier, in weeks or months' notice. The aspects of that capability and that readiness impact both how we look at how we man our forces, where we prioritize our full-time support resources to sustain a higher level of readiness of those capabilities, and where we prioritize modernizing and increasing the sustainment of certain systems to support those forces. I'm confident sitting here before this committee today and telling you that based on the work that's been done so far, and frankly based on some of the prioritization efforts we've made inside the Army Reserve, I'm confident that we can continue to meet the requirements necessary to provide those capabilities to the warfighter. As I've said to several members of this committee in other venues, fundamentally the challenge we have is time and making sure that we have adequate notice to prepare those forces fully for large-scale combat operations.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I'll direct this question to you, Admiral. Following multiple accidents involving ships at sea in 2017, the Navy produced several reports to ensure that we're learning from our mistakes and, more importantly, working to prevent future tragedies like these. It's my understanding that these reports, which include the Fleet Forces Command Comprehensive Review and Strategic Readiness Review, resulted in 117 firm recommendations. That's a lot of recommendations for reform. Could you provide us an update on the recommendations, either here or for the record, and your role in this process?
Thank you, Chairman, for that question, and I'll be happy to provide the details in a written response. But I can tell you that of those 117 recommendations, north of 90 of them have been implemented and on their way. And as they are focused on training and a culture of excellence and building a foundation for generating the controls and mechanisms in the surface warfare enterprise, the teams that have been stood up and focused on a steady drumbeat are delivering the output on plan, and we're going to continue to be very focused until all recommendations are delivered.
That's a big part of readiness, is it not?
Yes, sir. It is very key to readiness. It's personal readiness, it's equipment readiness, it's warfighting readiness, and it all comes together. Role clarity and the training that goes with it.
General Scobee, I understand that you're focusing on improving personnel programs and reaching Air Force end strength goals. Could you tell us about how this budget request supports your plan to achieve these goals that's been outlined, including converting 1,200 Air Force Reserve technicians to active Guard Reserve positions? And why is that important?
Mr. Chairman, all the changes that we're making in our personnel systems are to get after our readiness, but it's through the personnel readiness piece. And that starts with making sure that we meet our end strength. So all the programs and all the programming that you've seen in our budget, that's what I'm trying to get after. There are three things that I'm driving towards. One is our medical readiness piece of it and ensuring that we have that. With the appropriations we received last year, we had a 3,000 member backlog in our medical readiness. It is 0 today because of the on-time appropriations that we received, and we were able to focus some money into our medical readiness. Additionally, our programs, some of our antiquated systems, we are updating those in order to keep that friction of our members being able to serve at a minimum. And that includes their pay and benefits. So if we can solve those problems, that retention rate will come up. Additionally, my Air Reserve technician status has been difficult for us to fill for a myriad of reasons, but the AGR pay status that Congress has asked us to put in to the Air Force Reserve Command, we've been able to do that. So by putting the the active Guard and Reserve personnel positions into our force, it enables me to give people the pay status that best suits the needs of their families, and it also will help me with our readiness. So those are all the programs that we are changing right now in order to work on the personnel piece of our readiness in the Air Force Reserve Command.
Senator Durbin.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I want to follow up on one of your questions. General Lengyel, as I understood your answer to the chairman, you anticipate a shortfall of $190 million that the Guard will need to pay for the President's decision to deploy the State National Guards to the border. Is that correct?
Senator, that is correct. If we don't reprogram funds back into our training accounts, we will have to make modifications within our current appropriation that will either reduce our training opportunities or we'll do things like cancel drill weekends to find the money so that we have the money to make sure that we have it.
General, haven't you come before this committee repeatedly and told us that you need readiness more than anything else?
Well, readiness is our primary goal in accordance with the #1 priority of the National Defense Strategy is what we're doing from there.
So would you like to explain to me how canceling drill weekends enhances the readiness of the National Guard?
Senator, so the National Guard is part of a mission on the southwest border. We routinely deploy and do missions assigned to us that have impacts on our readiness. At the end of the day, we're going to accomplish the mission that was given to the National Guard, which is to assist the Department of Homeland Security and secure the border.
I'm not questioning your dedication or following the orders of the President. I'm just trying to work out the equation here.
Sure. When
you answer his call, and it costs $247 million, and you have a $190 million shortfall, and the Appropriations Committee asks you a very direct question, how are you going to pay for it? What you've suggested is the cancellation of drill weekends at $100 million a weekend. And I'm asking you, if readiness is the goal, is the cancellation of those weekends consistent with the goal of readiness?
Canceling drill weekends will impact readiness. And I would tell you that Well, what our hope is that the department finds funds available inside the department that are reallocatable to that, so we don't have to do that.
How much money is asked for in the president's budget for next year when it comes to this mission on the southern border?
So right now, there is no additional money.
So we're going to play this out again next year. We'll find out exactly when the president decides to declare the next invasion, send down good men and women who leave their jobs and their families to supplement what the border agents are doing, create a hole in the budget that the president's not even preparing for or not even anticipating, and run the risk that we'll cancel drill weekends across the board for our Guard and compromise their readiness. Is this any way to run a national defense?
Well, Senator, I would tell you that currently this mission is assigned to us through the end of this fiscal year. And so if there is a further assignment beyond the end of this year and into next year, we'll have to make accommodations to find
General,
the money.
I know you will do your duty.
Yes, sir.
And I obviously am questioning some decision-making at a higher level. Let me ask you why the National Guard and the Army Reserve had such difficulty in recruiting.
So, sir, I think the entire Army last year had trouble finding the recruiting. I mean, the reasons why could be, I think the economy has been very good. It's a very competitive environment.
The economy is also very good for prospective Marines, sailors, and airmen.
It is.
And they met their recruiting goals.
Well, as a component, we have to recruit big numbers of folks into our force. Every year, the Army National Guard has to recruit about 50,000 people into our force to maintain our numbers. And so, and the Army was growing a little bit. So as the Army was growing the active component, sometimes it becomes, it's a competition amongst all of the components to find the relatively small number that fit the requirements to be part of our force.
So, Senator, not to interrupt, but since the question is directed to the Army Reserve, as the leader of the Army Reserve, let me respond directly to your question to the Chief of the Guard Bureau. So, first of all, candidly, recruiting has not been a significant issue for us. I would acknowledge before this committee, as I think I've acknowledged to you before, the Army Reserve is not where its current authorization is from an end strength perspective. So I acknowledge implicitly that we've had some problems from a strength perspective. But I would not concede that fundamentally we have a challenge with recruiting. In fact, this last month, as an example, the Army Reserve exceeded its current sort of trend for the year by exceeding our recruiting goals for over 700 new enlistees into the Army Reserve. I would also tell you that from an accessions perspective, from an attrition perspective, attrition or losing soldiers out of the Army Reserve is at the lowest it's been in 18 years. Fundamentally, I would attribute the challenge that I have not so much to achieving end strength, because we are, as I said now, we are actually increasing our end strength and have consistently now for some period of time. The truth of the matter is, and I take some responsibility for this, Senator, in a vigorous push for readiness over the last couple of years, fundamentally directed by me to try to make sure we reduce the number of non-deployable soldiers in the Army Reserve and ready this force for major contingency operations in any number of potential theaters in a full domain of operational challenges. I have, in fact, insisted on additional readiness in terms of medical readiness, deployability, and all other aspects of warfighting skills. I would acknowledge that there has been some attrition in some soldiers who, frankly, probably hadn't been as challenged as they have in the last couple of years to remain in this force.
General Luckey, the numbers speak for themselves, and I'm just asking why the Army Reserve and Army National Guard have run into difficulties which the other branches haven't run into.
And Senator, I'll continue my question to you based on the Army National Guard. Is part of it has been a reduction in our full-time recruiters in order to recruit the force. So last year we were authorized an additional 440 recruiters, which will mitigate this year's shortfall. We will make our end strength this year. We believe that's probably not enough. We need to continue to add additional full-time support to help us recruit the force and sustain the force to the levels we need and to maintain its readiness.
Perhaps some of the reprogramming for the southern border can go for recruiters. That might be an interesting investment as well. I asked in a general way to prepare each one of you for this question, and I only have a few seconds left, so I'm going to pick on the Navy Reserve. What has happened in the last year that you found most challenging or disruptive in terms of what you had planned for the budget for the Navy Reserve?
Senator Durbin, thanks for the question. Well, first of all, let me thank the committee for giving us a budget on time, and that provided predictability. A reservist is at their best when they have that predictability with family, with their employer, and their military requirements. Anything that competes with that then worries us. Quite frankly, the demand that is generated for the shift of the focus on the national defense strategy. CNO has directed me to create a more lethal reserve, to move reserve billets to warfighting, and the move from less administrative and more warfighting. And as we shift to a maritime focus, support of great power competition, that movement and how we do it the right way has got my attention and takes most of my time as I think about it, sir.
Thank you. Let me say about appropriation bills on time. Fortunately, we're all in the loving arms of our chairman here, who has done such a magnificent job this fiscal year. We're confident he's going to do it again next year. Against all odds, he brings such skill to this task, and we all just stand here and just honor him today.
Thank you, Senator Durbin. I hope your statement becomes true. Yeah? Thank you. Senator Murkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and know that I echo the support and the encouragement for timely budgets. I know how critical it is, certainly for the Department of Defense. Thank you all for your leadership in all ways. I wanted to ask very quickly about the Innovative Readiness Training Program. We have seen just really extraordinary benefits from this program. Both Army, Marine Corps have been involved in specific projects up in my state that have gone a long way. The IRT funding is from a line in the defense-wide civil military appropriations and in part through, I believe, your training budgets. So for current fiscal year, we increased funding for that defense line by $10 million. The administration budget eliminates that adjustment. I'm going to seek to restore that. But the question that I would have for you all is whether your services would benefit from an increase of greater than the $10 million in the defense-wide line, and perhaps if there should be other areas that we should look to enhance these opportunities. So I guess the question to you all is whether or not, in your judgment, there are enough good training opportunities out there to support more substantial increases in this IRT program.
Senator Murkowski, I'd like to take a shot at that. Is anytime we can leverage a readiness training with finding incidental benefits or benefits to our states, our communities, our services, anything is a good thing. I would like to take an opportunity for the record to go specifically get you the numbers from at least what the National Guard's contribution to that is. But our ability to do real-world training on real-world scenarios, real-world events, I think is, as some of my colleagues have talked about, the ability here to manage the time required by our soldiers and our airmen, sailors, Marines as we do things. If we can get training, doing real-world duties for our states, for our communities, for our services in innovative readiness training, it's something that we should maximize that to the degree that we can. Thank you.
Well, and I appreciate that and would encourage you to look specifically at that. Again, we've seen great benefit in very remote islanded communities, whether it is Old Harbor on Kodiak, down in Metlakatla in southeast, up in Newtalk as that village is being threatened by coastal erosion and needs relocation. So the benefit out there that we have seen has been truly extraordinary, and everything that we hear is that it is fabulous training for you all. So if I can ask you to look specifically to that. Let me ask you another question, General Lengyel, and I would be remiss if I didn't put on the table again the interest of the 168th Air Refueling Wing. They want to enter into an association with the active components to address the refueling assets there in the North Pacific. We've been talking about it for a couple years now. Do you think that we can reasonably expect a resolution to this in the near future? We've got the F-35s coming beginning next year. And then also on the issue of assets is the Combat rescue helicopters. We're very, very proud of the extraordinary work that the National Guard Search and Rescue does there in the state. But the assets, the iron that's up there is very heavily utilized and needs replacement. So do we need to be moving more aggressively here to bring the new combat rescue helicopters online? So twofold for you.
So for two questions, with respect to the association, I have seen personally the benefits of associations and the benefits that gives in terms of productivity to the warfighter by blending together the systems of the reserve components and the active component. And I think that Alaska, the Air Mobility Command, the United States Air Force would need to look at this and make sure that we can do it. And if the manpower is available and the funding is available to put there's various different flavors of associations, as you know, to find manpower to put there against the association with the increase in aircraft and F-35s and things that are going to Alaska. I think that's a good thing, and we need to stay on it and make that happen.
Well, I appreciate you staying on it. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. And with respect to the combat rescue helicopter, it's a unique environment. Lots of rescues all the time.
All the time.
Going on with the increased training opportunities and activities that happen in Alaska all the time as well. Those combat rescue helicopters not only deploy routinely around the world in support of combatant commanders, but they get a lot of business right there in Alaska. It is an old platform. The Air Force is in the process of recapitalizing that platform. And I know that General Goldfein and the Air Force are going to do that as quick as it can. And the Alaska National Guard and the rescue helicopters need to be part of it.
Well, we're going to keep pushing on that one as well. Let me ask then, because you've mentioned several times the value of the training up north. The National Defense Strategy and its projection of future of great power competition has the active component, once again, looking to the possibility that American forces are going to be needed to be fighting in cold weather, in conditions that our climate of the Arctic. Well, we've got the training grounds, certainly. The National Guard Bureau has stood up its Arctic Interest Council to begin to prepare for this challenge. We really thank you for your leadership with that. But I don't know that I've ever had the opportunity to raise this with the other reserve commanders. So I would ask you what you all are doing now in terms of doctrine, training, equipment, anything else that you might deem relevant to prepare for training opportunities, to train up your units in an Arctic environment if called upon, and if so, what do we need to do from a resourcing perspective? One of the things that we're pushing is some basic things, like making sure that we've got outerwear that is sufficient to protect from the cold. But can you very quickly just speak to
So, Senator, if I may, as the leader of America's Army Reserve, as I said, some 200,000 soldiers. So we're actually very acutely aware of the conditions in which we might have to operate, and I acknowledge your question. And I'll tell you, we made significant investment both in terms of equipping. At least some portion of this force is necessary to operate in those environments. In terms of literally the clothing you're speaking of and equipment that'll operate in that environment. And at the risk of expanding the conversation a little bit, I'll tell you that in addition to acknowledging that we have Army Reserve soldiers in Alaska that obviously train and are very proficient operating in that environment, we also are very proud of the Army Reserve, very proud of the training platform it has at Fort McCoy, Wisconsin, which is also another cold weather training environment. Not necessarily quite what you'd get in northern Alaska.
I think it's going to be cold in Wisconsin.
It's pretty, but I think
Alaska,
Senator
right?
Baldwin would agree that it can get cold in Wisconsin. So we actually take that very seriously and are increasing our proficiency to operate in that environment.
Good, I appreciate that. Others want to tell me what they're doing?
Senator, yeah, thanks for the question. From the Marine Corps side, our commandant's been talking about going north here for a couple of years, and so we
welcome those conversations. You know, we're looking at ADAC with great interest.
Yes, ma'am. And senior leadership, we've sent some senior leaders up to take a look. I had the opportunity to go up to Alaska the last 3 summers with the Old Harbor IRT in progress, and I see a lot of benefits of going up there. From the Marine Forces Reserve side, I've directed an exercise up into Canada this year Tried to get it over into Alaska, but just the tyranny of distance was too much for our first one. So we'll continue to develop that. It's mostly aviation-based this year, but we're going to go into the ground side in the battalions. They're off years from our integrated training exercises out in the desert. And so it is a challenge, though, for the sheer numbers of during the wintertime, the cold season, if you will, just because we have so many students. And so obviously our high demand season is the summer, but it's something we can do at a smaller level to get our Marines cold, get them used to it.
Good, thank you. Thank you.
Senator, on the Navy side, we recently undertook an exercise with the Harry S. Truman Strike Group and did an exercise in the high north with our allies and partners in the late fall time frame. In many cases, we relearned a lot of lessons of the past. It had been many, many years since we had operated up there in cold weather. So not only the things how we equip our sailors with working in cold weather, but things that happen when ice occurs. How do you break the ice and many things. So we have a pretty exhaustive amount of lessons learned from that endeavor with that entire strike group. And as the Navy's looking at that to prepare to be very versatile and capable in cold weather domains.
I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Senator, if I could just add one thing. You mentioned the Guard. I would just say that given the increased activity in the Arctic, as you know, the National Guard, not just in Alaska, but all of the states on the Arctic Interest Council are preparing for inevitable activity up there, search and rescue activity, disaster response activity when humans need to be up there. And not only that, but as part of the National Defense Strategy, working with allies and partners in the Arctic together. We do a lot of that through Alaska, a lot of that through the National Guard Interest Council. So we think it's a very important future mission area for the National Guard to be part of.
Greatly appreciate it. Thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Tester.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to echo the comments of our ranking member of this committee and your leadership skills. I want to thank you all for being here. I appreciate it very, very much, and I appreciate the people that you represent in our military. I've been a long-time proponent of upgrading the C-130Hs, and so General Lengyel, this is directed at you. And you know, I get it. I mean, I run a farm. It's easier. It's cheaper to repair than to buy new, but you give up some things when you're working with an airframe that was originally built in 1956, and the same year I was born, and I'm about wore out, so I guess they probably wore out too. But the point is that things have changed a lot, and now we've got these 130Js out there, and which I can only imagine if it's changed like it has in my tractors, and I would bet it's changed a lot more than that. I'd be hard-pressed to put my dad, who's long passed, on the tractor that we run today and have him run it. So the question is on a 130H, and if they're in active military and they're flying the C-130Js, which is the newer airframe, and they go to a Guard unit that has 130Hs, is there retraining necessary for that?
To change from the C-130H to the C-130J, there is...
Or vice versa.
Or vice versa. Yes, sir, there is some differences training that the aircrew have to do.
And so...
And maintainers as well.
Not to get back to the point that the Senator Durbin made, but I mean, that could have an impact on your recruitment too, and keeping folks in the active military in the Guard, which is an incredible asset, right?
Absolutely, sir, without a doubt.
Okay, so, and then I also know that getting parts for the older equipment's kind of hard to get, and so we had a bunch of H's that were grounded because of a prop issue, and unfortunately some people got killed that pointed out the prop issue, which is very unfortunate, tragedy. Were there any 130Js that are grounded because of the prop issue?
No, sir. I think your point about the C-130H models being older and more expensive and more difficult to maintain and staying operational is spot on.
And you're a little different because when you have a mission to do and you go to fire up the old plane and the generator doesn't work or the starter doesn't work, you can't go down the road 75 miles to get a part. My guess is it probably takes a while to get those parts. Probably have to be made, right?
In some cases, yes, sir. In some cases, the older equipment is harder to find parts for sure.
So does this budget take us a significant step forward in replacing those H's?
Sir, this particular budget does not in terms of replacing them. There is some money in the budget that will do avionics modernization program number 2, which will actually keep the airplanes more modern, more flyable. But things that the C-130 needs, you mentioned one of them, that they were grounded for propulsion for propeller issues. There are programs that can fix the engines, that can change the propeller systems, that can make the airplane modernization go further, and there is no money in this budget to do that.
Yeah, and you know better than I, you're still flying an airplane that potentially could be 62 years old.
Yes, sir. Okay. No doubt about it.
Okay, I just think that as we move forward here, and you know, we have to prioritize what we're doing, and I know you prioritize what you're doing, all of you do. I think this is a pretty high priority item. I mean, really.
Senator, it is, and I would mention over the last 3 years, we have had the good fortune to have some 16 new C-130J models added to the National Guard. Those will be stationed here at some point in the future, but...
Can we get about 8 of those in Great Falls, Montana?
We got, yeah, there is a basing process that will determine where they ultimately go. But,
okay.
But the Air Force, in my view, we need to maintain, continue to upgrade some of them, and while seriously consider a modernization program, a recapitalization program that seriously considers continuing the accession of new J models.
I appreciate that, and I think that, and I think it's all about budgets and priorities, and it's about actually getting to a situation where we're actually meeting the needs of this country from a security standpoint, and you've been able to do your job. And I just think that a lot of these planes should be in museums, quite frankly, and we're still trying to keep them up in the air. I want to talk about mental health because I know it's an issue that you all are concerned about. And I think we've got some good programs out there. I think the Air Force Yellow Ribbons program has been a good program. I think the Navy Reserve Psychological Health Outreach program has been a good program. I guess the question I have is when it comes to mental health services, and be as brief as you can, do we have adequate access to mental health services for our Guards and Reservists?
Well, sir, from the National Guard perspective, we certainly could use more. There are access programs. There are some, but some of our Guardsmen don't qualify.
But they're a bit deficient right now, as far as access to mental health folks, especially in rural areas.
Yes, sir. No. In rural areas, clearly there are places where we don't have it.
Okay. Anybody else want to respond to that? If it's the same.
Senator, I would concur. I think to some extent, it would be inappropriate for me to tell you that it is common across the board.
Right. Okay.
As you all know, some of it depends on where our soldiers.
Yeah, that's right on. Yep. Okay.
As Senator, from the Marine Corps Reserves, we have about 60 counselors out there, mostly full-time, some part-time. They're contracted out. I don't have the details or their workflow, but we could always say we could use more with our dispersal of all of our Marine Reserves. Okay.
Let's talk about the programs that appear to be working and doing things that I think cover the gaps that are out there for our fighting men and women. Do you guys share? I mean, you're kind of siloed, but you probably shouldn't be, in particularly in mental health standpoint. But are you able to share successes to be able to utilize best practices between the different branches, Admiral?
Senator, thank you. It's a very important topic for the Navy Reserve as we manage this in the Eaches. First of all, for redeploying sailors who have gone on deployment, we offer both services and a program, Returning Warrior, part of the Yellow Ribbon program, and then over time, you mentioned PHOP, it's been very effective for us. And what we have learned that the opportunities to engage and communicate is where we get the best value out of this. Now, as we track metrics, and whether it is in the suicidal ideation, where we have seen an uptrend, we actually don't view that necessarily as negative because they're willing to talk about it, because we track that when they're willing to talk about their issue, whereas perhaps before, without a PHOP counselor, et cetera, maybe they wouldn't have talked about it and have held that thought internally.
Yeah, but spot on, but are you able to share what works, and is it transferable to the other components of the military?
We know it works through testimonies.
And are you able to share it?
With the individuals, without individual names, we can share.
How about between the branches of the military? Can you share?
We should be able to share our best practices, of course.
And do you?
I'd say unqualifiedly yes.
Okay, good. I think this is a problem that I know is on your guys' radar screen, every one of your radar screens. And the more people we can get at the table, I think the better off we are. And if one of the branches got something that works, hopefully you guys make a real solid effort to say, hey guys, this is working for me, you might want to give it a shot.
So, Senator, I'll just assure you, I pay very close attention to what all of my compatriots are doing and making sure we're using best practices everywhere we can to get after this challenge.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, General Lengyel, let's talk about C-130s just a little bit more. Totally parochial, as all those discussions usually are. This is Rosecrans. Before I ask my question, let me say that actually on this topic generally, on the airlift training, the weapons training, that used to be much more year to year and much less specific in funding than it is now. I think both the Air Force and the Guard have really worked hard with the committee and to try to get that to where it's more understood. At the 139th at Rosecrans, they do training in both of those areas for people from sometimes up to 20 countries in a year that we are friends with to train on airlift and weapons. We lost an aircraft last year, I think, on the topic of just being sure that our equipment is everything it ought to be. Obviously, that and readiness are appropriate. I think you knew I was going to ask this. When do you think we'll see a return of that 8th aircraft to that training base?
Sir, I think that, over the Air Force program, every C-130 unit lost a funded primary aircraft in those units. Was how the Air Force spent its money around. And the Air Force is going to relook at that towards the end of the FIDEP. And I'll give you a question for the record. I'll come back to you and make sure I know when that's going to be right.
All right, I'll let you follow up with the Air Force on that for me, and I'll expect that for the record. On a question that I'd like all of you to think about and respond if you have a response. Obviously, in the cyber space, I'm also on the Intel Committee. The cyber warrior space, the cyberspace, a real challenge for us. I've always thought there was a unique opportunity for the Guard and the Reserve to have that cyber warrior who's out there every day in another capacity, seeing what's happening. And I just wonder what kind of programs, General Luckey, starting with you, that you're looking at, and if we're able to take advantage of that capacity of someone who is in a different situation most of the time, who actually, because of that, is probably better prepared for the daily challenges of cyber than others might be.
So, Senator, first of all, thank you for the question. I would acknowledge and agree with your implicit assumption, which is sort of what you stated at the end, which is in many cases we have a lot of soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines out there working in the private sector, developing and sustaining incredible skills. And we want to obviously bring them into or retain them in the U.S. military. As for the Army Reserve, as I said in my opening statement, Senator, about 2 years ago, we retasked the two-star command in Houston, Texas, the 75th Training Command, to become the 75th Innovation Command. It is now in the posture to both operationalize some of the challenges you're talking about and candidly take it beyond cyber to artificial intelligence, to take it to quantum computing and other places. I call it digital key terrain, as I said in my opening statement. We can go out there and essentially move structure to capture that talent and retain it for America and for the U.S. Army. So I'll tell you, we're very aggressively pursuing that strategy. It's already paying dividends, and we are in direct support of Army Futures Command, which, as you know, is located in Austin. So we'll continue to press this. This is a journey of discovery, but I totally agree with your implicit assumption on this, and we will continue to operationalize.
Yeah, I just think this is an area where people who aren't in the full-time service bring a different set of facts and understandings to their effort to be a cyber warrior. General Scobee?
Senator Blunt, you are exactly correct. I'll put a fine point on this. I'll tell you what we've really seen, and is in the Air Force Reserve Command. This year, we stood up our first cyber wing. It's in San Antonio. And what we see there is recruiting and retention is very high in that wing, because what we give our airmen the ability to do is our part-time airmen that work in this industry across America, they will fly out and work the cyber mission that is there in San Antonio. We actually have them spread all over the country too, in squadrons, and they are directly responsible and move into active component organizations as well. So there's these components that we have working hand in hand with the active duty and the reserve command, and they work very well. What we're able to do is we gain significant talent from industry where they have great expertise, all the tech industry that you can imagine, and then we bring that to bear. One of the things that's very interesting is the things that you can do in the military are much different than you might be able to do in civil society. So it's interesting to them, which really helps with our retention, as you know from your other committees you sit on. Thank you.
Yes, sir. We have 59 cyber units in the Army and Air National Guard. We have 3 cyber protection teams that are mobilized today. For all the reasons my colleagues mentioned about location of commercial and the nexus between the civil sector and the military sector, the ability to train a cyber warrior and then retain him as a potential warfighter is something that the reserve component does extremely well. We have started a unique program this year called Cyber Mission Assurance Teams. It's a program that looks specifically inside states, federal facilities, and makes sure that those facilities that are tied to utilities and sectors that are not necessarily military in nature, that we can assure that power and support goes to the federal installations, and we're continuing that.
Right. General James and then Admiral.
Senator, spot on with the question. So we are taking advantage of the civilian skill sets we have out there. We do have talent within Marine Forces Reserve. Our largest IMA is in the Marine Corps is currently at Marine Forces Cyber. We're currently standing up 2 defensive cyber companies, one on the East Coast and one on the West Coast. Realigning structure, no additional structure has been thrown to this yet.
Senator equally said, specialty codes is how we identify sailors and their skill set, and a cyber specialty code is identified as critical. When it's critical, it allows us to pull levers which maybe restrict us otherwise. So things like recruiting quotas, we can go beyond those quotas if we see a skill set. Training recruiters what to look for. Joining partnerships, which we have done with academic institution and industry, where those skill sets for cyber have evolved faster than the Navy's capacity to train to in some instances. In that regard, the ability to bring in, give constructed service credit for a validated industry skill that we can bring in sometimes in lateral into the Navy. So we are laser focused on this.
Excellent. Oh, thank you all. Thank you, Chairman.
Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you to all of our witnesses for being here today and your service. General Luckey and General Lengyel, you've done a great job of improving the operational capacity of the total Army. However, as you know, insufficient funding can widen capability gaps and will harm the reserve's ability to support the joint force. So I've observed that consecutive budget requests have failed to keep pace with the tactical wheeled vehicle modernization requirements. In fact, in the fiscal year 20 request, there is no funding for recapped heavy tactical wheeled vehicles for the reserves, and the request zeroes out funding for HEMET recap beyond fiscal year 20. The Army budget basically eliminated all funding for mediums and heavies for the Guards and Reserves, despite those known requirements. Consequently, the Reserves increasingly relies on National Guard and Reserve equipment appropriation, which has been helpful, but as a planning tool is unpredictable as it falls outside of the normal appropriations. And it limits the ability to forecast. Further, the Army's funding strategy fails to support the minimum sustaining rates, and you know that's something I talk about a lot, for a very fragile supply base. that supports the heavy recap industrial base that is across the Midwest. Finally, I'm not suggesting that we modernize mediums and heavies rather than improving the Bradley fighting vehicle. However, I suggest that we learn from the past and keep in mind that countless support and sustainment soldiers have traveled down those same dangerous roads in Iraq and Afghanistan, oftentimes in HEMTs and FMTVs, and they'll continue to do so in future conflicts. So my question for you, General Luckey and General Lengyel, is do you agree that tactical wheeled vehicles such as the HEMT and FMTV provide a critical capability that ensures the Army Reserve components can execute their required missions of homeland defense, domestic emergency responses, and providing military support to civil authorities?
Senator, I do. I think that from the Guard perspective, I support the Army's modernization programs. We need to be part of it as the reserve component, the National Guard. We need to modernize in concert with the Army as they replace their tactical vehicles across the spectrum of tactical vehicles. And I think that we do have a unique eye on the homeland requirements to make sure that our vehicles and like are be able to sync up and do things here in the homeland, as you mentioned. But we need to be embedded with, whatever we have in the Army National Guard needs to be deployable, sustainable, and interoperable with what they have in the Army. And so that's where we come down on that. Over.
Thank you.
Senator, if I may, as I've said before, my view of this is, and I would echo what General Lengyel just said to the extent that I'm very much focused on making sure those formations that go out early on and that RFX construct, which I know you're more than familiar with, have the same mobility, the same lethality, the survivability, and the netted mission command architecture to operate completely in an interoperable fashion with every other formation on the battlefield. Both is just absolutely the right thing to do. It also gives you the capabilities you need in combat to operate without having somebody too slow or unable to keep up or keep pace or survive with their across the total force. I would also tell you, as you well know, I acknowledge your point about Negri, and I appreciate the support that this committee, along with the House, has given us to have some flexibility in this regard. But as I think you know, I'm committed to making sure that the Army Reserve continues to lead this conversation as far as modernizing key aspects of our force. As you know, we have made an early investment with Negri dollars into a small but very important capability in the JLTV program, which as you know, we're bringing together right now at Fort McCollum, Wisconsin, to make sure that we are preparing ourselves for the future, training our soldiers for the future, and learning how to essentially ingest these new technologies and capabilities as quickly as possible at the reserve component of the United States Army.
Thank you. And then General Lengyel, as we have discussed, and I know you're very aware of, I'm extremely proud of the men and women at the 115th Fighter Wing, located at Truax Air National Guard Base in Madison, Wisconsin. In 2017, the 115th was selected to perform the F-35A mission, and our community stands ready to support that mission. However, it's my understanding that there have been some delays in the process, which include the Air Force's environmental review process and public hearings. So I just would appreciate it if you could give me a status update, as well as any potential impacts of these delays on the planned bed-down schedule for Ops 5 and 6.
Senator, I'll commit to do that. I'm not aware of any meaningful delays in the program. I believe everything is on track, that everything is funded, but I will double check that and deliver you my assessment.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Senator Hoeven.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to all of you for your service and for your leadership. It's greatly appreciated. General Lengyel, the Guard is not able to use the full tuition benefit along with the GI Bill for their education as the active duty forces are. And so that's something that I think we need to address. Senator Bozeman, who's also a member of this committee, myself, have now put in a bill to do that. but essentially it would provide that any member of the Guard for their education could use both GI Bill and the full tuition benefit. Would you please give me your thoughts on whether you support that?
Senator, I fully support. Many of our Guard members join the reserve components to get the education benefits that come with it, and a more educated force is a more valued, ready force for the United States Army, United States Air Force. I fully support both federal assistance and GI Bill assistance.
And in fact, that can be an important component for recruitment and retention.
Absolutely,
right.
No doubt about it.
And I would note for the record, the Department of Defense also supports the legislation, so we appreciate it. One other, along that same line, the Army Guard offers tuition benefit. Air Guard does not. And so where are you in terms of getting that established?
Sir, the Air National Guard is putting together a process right now, and I believe it's their intent to implement a situation similar to the Army National Guard so that you could do both.
Good. Yeah, we need to have both in place for
Yes,
our
sir.
fantastic Guardsmen. You and I have talked about it, but the 119th in the Happy Hooligans in Fargo, North Dakota operate the MQ-9. Matter of fact, I think they were the first or one of the first Guard units to get, at that time, the Predator mission, now the Reaper mission. And based on their missions, which they've performed very well and they very much want to keep because they're very important missions, they do need a new building. But if the new building isn't brought online in time with the upgrades that they need to operate the MQ-9, it would force them to stand down for a period of time, which, you know, you could say, well, maybe isn't a big deal, except they do have clients they're serving that they very much want to keep, and those clients want to keep them because of the incredible service. So that building construction really needs to be in FY21. It's under design now. Your thoughts on getting that done so we don't have a disruption in service?
So yes, sir, my thoughts is that I believe that the current facility can sustain operations in this mission set until the new building is up and running. It is our desire and our plan to make sure that it is a seamless transition and that the building does not have to stand down mission while a move into a new facility takes place. Good. But I will follow up and report back to you again.
Yeah, very important. And if it isn't on schedule, well, either way, if you could just keep me apprised of that schedule.
Senator, I will.
Very important unit. One of the other things that I want to ask you about is that when you look at our Guard, and I was governor for 10 years out there, so you rely on the Guard for so much. I mean, it's not only the incredible service throughout the war on terror, which has just been unbelievable, 4 and 5 deployments in some cases, reserve as well. But, you know, every time there's a flood like we're having up there now, or fires or tornadoes or just anything you can think of, it's the first, you know, the first group you call is the National Guard. Every time. It's amazing. But, you know, just based on both my service as governor and my service here, what I see is a shortage of full-time positions. When I look at the size of our Guard and what their mission staffing is supposed to be, there may be 70% at most of their full-time relative to what, you know, they really need based on their mission requirement. Maybe 70%, maybe less, okay? Is that typical throughout the Guard, and don't we need to be looking at more full-time positions in the Guard? And we can have the reserve members respond afterwards, but you know, based on my experience as governor, I really see it in the Guard, and I see it as a pressing need. Your thoughts on that?
Yes, sir. My thoughts are that the adjutants general have told me that their number one concern with respect to maintaining the readiness of the force is the number of full-time support that they have inside the Army National Guard. We are currently manned at 64% of the requirement, so not even 70%.
Right.
Whatever the Army says we need, we're funded at 64% of what that requirement is. There's no other readiness program inside the National Guard funded, and inside the Army National Guard funded at that level, so there certainly is risk. I mean, I've been sitting up here saying how operational we are and how deployable we are, and we're the best National Guard, and all those things are true, but there certainly is risk, both in the maintaining of readiness for our federal mission, which is the primary thing we do, and then to be ready to be mobilized by the governors to have the full-time force there that sustains our operations, our facilities, our equipment, so that it's ready to work. It is a significant risk that I have conveyed to the Army.
Well, and as we look at bang for the buck, I mean, and you look at the rate of deployment throughout the war on terror and everything else, and then you add in all of the natural disaster stuff, everything from putting you at the border to anything you can think of, it just seems to me like this is a huge priority when we look at manpower funding for the overall DOD.
Senator, what I've recommended is that that we move towards a funding level of not 64%, but 80% of the requirement. And that's roughly an increase across the country of about 10,000 more full-time positions. Convert part-time billets. I'm not saying grow the whole Guard. I'm just saying convert part-time billets to full-time billets and allow us to increase the percentage of full-time force there. That's about 1,000 a year. We can show you the readiness that will generate to everything we've discussed across the board today, from recruiting the force to retaining the force to make sure that everything works so that the M-Day soldier can come to work and train and be ready to deploy when the country needs it to.
Well, if I could get more information on that from you, I'd be willing to talk to our absolutely outstanding chairman and ranking member and others about it.
Yes, sir. I'll pass it to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, my understanding is that current DOD policy restricts the use of defense environmental restoration funding for the cleanup of PFAS, a chemical that has been found to have contaminated certain National Guard state facilities. As a result, many installations or units may be forced to use operations and maintenance funds to conduct those cleanups. In Maine, our governor has set up a task force charged with reviewing the prevalence of PFAS in our state. This is an issue that the TAG in Maine has mentioned to me as well. Should the Guard, in your judgment, have full access to the defense environmental restoration funding in order to remediate these sites that are contaminated by PFAS?
Senator Collins, I fully believe that we should. 2 years ago, up until 2 years ago, we did have access to this account. I think they should treat our installations like they treat every installations. We use those products because they were mandated by the federal government to use it in our Army and Air National Guard facilities. And I believe that they should treat us just like every federal installation and let us have access to the DARA account.
It does seem very odd that you don't already have access, so I appreciate your getting that on the record. Later this month, and I hope to be there at the send-off, the Maine Army National Guard's 286th Combat Sustainment Support Battalion in Bangor will be deploying to Europe in support of Operation Atlantic Resolve. Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2014, U.S. forces have been rotating, as you're well aware, through Europe for this vital mission to deter further Russian aggression and conduct multinational training with our NATO allies and other European partners. Could you describe the importance of the role that the National Guard plays in supporting the Atlantic Resolve?
Senator, thank you for that question. We play a role first and foremost as part of the United States Army. We deploy into Europe and into NATO. They look across, our potential adversaries, the Russians, look across and they see a United States flag and they see a United States Army. And we see a well-trained, well-equipped, ready force that can deter potential aggressive activity. What the National Guard also brings is our unique relationships in the State Partnership Program, the relationships we have with 22 nations across all of Europe. They know us, they trust us, they train with us, they deploy with us. It is a unique security cooperation tool that only enhances our ability to assure our partners and allies and make a ready force. So keeping us ready makes us a part of that force, making sure that we assure our allies and partners that we're there and when they need us is part of the National Defense Strategy. And we have 2,000 people over there right now deployed as part of Operation Atlantic Resolve.
Well, soon you'll have 70 very capable Mainers joining them.
Absolutely. Thank you for that.
I'm glad that you mentioned the Guard State Partnership Program. I view this as a high-leverage, low-cost program that benefits the United States beyond just military cooperation. And I'm very proud of the role that the Maine National Guard has played in preparing Montenegro for a session into NATO. And I know the partnership has also benefited the Maine Guard as well. I visited Montenegro, and I can't tell you how grateful they were to the United States and to the Maine National Guard specifically for helping them get ready for NATO membership. And they just went on and on about how valuable the training and assistance had been. And that helped strengthen those countries which were once in the orbit of the Soviet Union. And it also, if we can get stronger partners in NATO, that benefits all of us. So given the growing importance of the state partnership program, what would be the impact if funding is inconsistent or not sustained as far as your ability to plan and execute those state partnership engagements?
Senator Collins.
I like
yes.
that. The secretary is okay.
I think that the impact of not having the funding would be very harmful to the program. One thing that I want to say about this year's funding is we got it on the 1st of October. We got all of our funding that we can execute throughout the year, and this year we will be able to execute all of the funding that we get for state partnership program, which is about $29 million. Thank you for the budget on time and the funding on time and the full year to use it. This year in the president's budget, the funded level is requested is at about $16 million. We need another $14 million to bring us up to the current level of funding that we have. Every year, this program now has 83 partners. Last year, we were in New York Harbor and we added Brazil to the partnership program. We have Sri Lanka and Nepal standing by to be assigned states now to partner with them. And this program is still growing at a rate of 2 to 3 partnerships a year. And it's doing amazing security cooperation work that is directly tied to the National Defense Strategy under the command and control and auspices of the combatant commanders. And it is a hugely important program. Every time we add 2 to 3 partners, we need to add about $1 million a year to sustain that program. Over time, I think this is going to be a legacy of the National Guard. It's our relationships with these friends, as you saw the Secretary General Stoltenberg talk about last week when he was addressing Congress and said, it's good to have friends. We build friends in this partnership and combat capability. We have deployed to the combat zone more than 80 times with our partners and our host nations. That is a good thing for the United States.
It's a great partnership program, and I hope we can fully fund it. Mr. Chairman, I want to echo my thanks for your leadership in getting the department funded on time. That has made such a difference. Thank you very much.
We hope to do it again.
We're going to do it again.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
This will conclude our hearing. We appreciate all of you appearing before the committee today. There were other senators at other committee meetings, and they would probably want to submit additional questions, and perhaps I even have a couple of questions. And I'd hope you would, if they are submitted, you would answer them in a reasonable time.
Yes, Chairman.
The Defense Subcommittee will reconvene in open session on Wednesday, May the 1st at 10 a.m. to receive testimony from the Department of the Navy. Subcommittee stands in recess. Thank you.